There we go. Hopefully that music got everyone going today. Welcome to today's webinar. We're covering Media Composer, customizing the interface, mapping keyboard, exporting user settings. We are very happy to have with us Marianne, who's going to be covering today's session. So we'll just quickly touch our housekeeping items. As most of you know, the session is being recorded. Feel free to ask questions using the questions tab. If you're following us in Zoom, I am trying to monitor all the social feeds. So if you have a question, you can enter it there as well. These sessions will be posted back to avid.com's website. If you are on Zoom, again, you can raise your hand and let us know if you have a question or if something's going on. So give us a shout out. Let us know where you're watching from. It looks like we have some people from the UK. Hello from the other side of the pond. LA, you guys are up early. Glad to see you on. Brazil, awesome. So it looks like we have a full house for you, Mary Ann. So, oh, whoops, sorry with my slide there. So again, we have Mary Ann Post, who's one of our Avid Master instructors. She also participates in writing most of the curriculum, I would say, for Media Composer. So, and I know Mary has a ton of things to cover. Yep. And I always enjoy your sessions, Mary Ann. So I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to you because I know, like I said, you have several things you want to touch on today.
All right. Thanks, Dawn. Hello, everybody. I hope everybody's doing well. And as mentioned, I am covering interface settings, and which is pretty much the most personal set of options you can be playing around in Media Composer because we can make it our own. And you may be coming from another software, so you can adapt your settings to feel more like that software, especially keyboard shortcuts. You may be a seasoned editor who's just looking to be more efficient, so hopefully I have some tips for you. And then you may be brand new, didn't even realize you could really change your settings, maybe using another user set, and now you go to set up your own and it looks completely different. So covering all of that, I am going to be probably mentioning some functions that you may not know how they work, but I will encourage you to explore them because of the focus on interface. I'm not going to have time really to demo those features, but hopefully I've come up with a creative way to be able to show those. So I'm going to start off by sharing my screen, which is all set here. And let's minimize Zoom. Okay, so I am inside of Media Composer at the Select Project dialog box for Media Composer 2020. I happen to be on 2020.9 using a MacBook Pro. So if this Select Project dialog box looks completely different than you're used to, you're probably pre-2020. Not to worry, most of the user settings that I'm going to show you will apply to you. This first bit may not. So in the Select Project dialog box, we'll see there's a user profile option that I'm pointing to. And then right now I'm just set up actually on the default. When I logged into my computer and launched Media Composer for the first time, it automatically creates a user profile based on my login for my machine, which is M. And I can create a new user here or import, which we'll talk about more. So this is one option for creating a new user and that kind of thing. We'll do that in a moment. We're going to actually do it from within the software. One thing I want to be sure to cover is a newer feature with 2020.4 and later, and that's setting a poster frame, which is one of the reasons why we're starting on this screen. You can see my lower project has a thumbnail to represent the project. My top project that we're going to be working in, just to have something open actually, does not. So let's take a look at how to set a poster frame. And so I'm just going to open my project. Now, poster frames are done through the Composer window. So your source monitor or your record monitor. Now I have nothing loaded in my source monitor, so I will not be using that. But conveniently, magically, I have a frame that's going to represent my project here on the record monitor side. So my project's right where I left off. To set a project poster frame, I just right click in this monitor. And then I'm going to choose Save As Project Poster Frame, almost at the bottom of the list. That's it. So if I close out of my project, if I selected it well, sometimes I'm not great at selecting during presentations. Let's check. If I close out of my project, there it is. Okay, so you can set a project poster frame, pretty easy to identify. And if the frame size isn't great, this is kind of usually about the default, just change the column width. So if you're familiar with changing bin column widths and that kind of thing, the select project dialog box now pretty much works like a bin. Okay. I'm going to go back into my project. That's where I'm going to create a new user. Right now, I'm just using the generic. This is my test space where I'm always playing around with settings or setting things up for screen capture when I'm doing curriculum development. So I'm going to go ahead and set a new user. And I'm going to do that through File and Settings. Shift Command equals on the Mac, Shift Control equals on Windows. I have you guys covered too. Also on the Mac, if you're used to accessing settings through Command, comma, you can use that too, because that's actually how I typically grab my settings. So mostly I'm going to use the shortcuts just to save some time. So I'm in my settings where we've got like format, project, and we're focused on user. And so I'm just going to come into this and you'll see that I'll have options to create a new user. I can also import, which I'm going to import my setting at the end, because I can set up a user setting in about 5 minutes, and it takes, I could spend an hour explaining these things to you. So I've tried to streamline this as much as possible with a quick review of my setting at the end. So we'll be using that. And then you can also export, which we'll be doing. So I'm going to create a new user, and I am just going to call this live webinar. So if I'm in a shared environment, it's usually my name, or if I'm on my own system like I am right now, it's usually what kind of function am I going to be setting up for? Is it dual monitor? Is it single monitor? What resolution? Right now, for me, everything looks huge because I know everything looks tiny on video. So this isn't even my normal total comfort workspace, but there we go. So we can see some changes. So if you're new to Media Composer, using Media Composer first, you may recognize this, the lovely live vibrant colors in the timeline, the green bar in the source and the blue bar in the record. All of a sudden my bin background is all purple and that kind of thing. This is not how I work, but I teach a lot this way because it's a comfort zone for new users. So at the 100 level. So how to customize this, or if you've recently upgraded to 2019, 2020, how do you make things look more like what you're used to before? Because that's literally what I first did. So it's not about you have to have this set of settings. It's about making it doable for you. Are you the editor that's editing every day? You're probably going to spend a lot of time mapping your keyboard. Are you the casual editor who's just trying to survive a project? You're probably going to use a lot of the defaults and then just kind of rearrange things so it makes sense to you. So the settings I changed the most, and I'm just going to go to File and Settings, okay, are the timeline settings. So if I actually hit T for timeline, it takes me to the T category. So I do a lot with timeline settings, composer settings, and then interface. Now, in my prep for this, I did not have time to really go into composer settings or timeline settings, which is one of the reasons why I'll be showing you guys my user set at the end due to the speed of these events. So I'm going to start off with interface settings here, and I'm just going to move this over a bit. And when I double click, here are some of the options. Now, I've been working in the dark interface for a long time. Way back when I was a heavy After Effects user and After Effects went dark, and I'm like, I love this. And then I started making Media Composer dark. Now, if you're more traditional, where you've always just used light mode, on this first general tab, there you go. You can get light mode back, which to me looks beyond bright. But then again, it's what you're used to. What you're used to is what's right. Okay? What gets us through projects efficiently. There's also super dark mode. So you have options. So that I tend to leave alone. One thing I haven't been a fan of, and this is all personal preference, is the white highlight. So I actually tend to turn this to purple. Okay, so then when things are highlighted in the bin and that kind of thing in various areas of my timeline, it's the purple, not the white. Also at the select project dialog box, my projects will highlight in purple instead of white. So I like that, but it's personal preference. A new setting with 2020.4 is closing a docked tool will replace it with a blank panel. if you have had it where you close your composer window or you close your timeline window, or maybe your audio mixer or something, where all of a sudden the whole interface starts resizing itself, this can stop that from happening. So I do turn this on, because even me, I'll start working quickly and end up closing a panel that I didn't mean to, and the whole interface doesn't resize on me. So there we go. So those are the ones I really wanted to highlight here. Bins. The big one here is text size, especially if you're sitting with a client or your monitors are further back. Text can look tiny, and I'm not even on my normal interface where my text is tinier. So you can completely customize that. So for example, I can set my font size for all my bin containers, which is the left side of the bin container window. And so I might set that to like a 14. And depending on my monitor resolution, that'll change. So you can see that adjusted. And then I could also do the same thing for my actual bins, okay? Which I'm actually, just for contrast, gonna leave that alone. So you can set those. In my bins, you can kind of see it here behind my settings. I don't want to close out due to time. You can see I have a purple in the background, and then I have a purple tab. I love color labels. My whole life is color labels because I tend to get really distracted easily, and it keeps me organized. So I do that in Media Composer, but I really don't want the background in my bin to be a color background. So I actually set this setting, use bin background color only on tabs. And then I get my ideal world. So it depends on you. Do you want the background to be in color? Great. Turn this off. Do you want just the tabs? Great. Don't colorize your backgrounds if you want everything to be gray. And then finally, in this interface, showing the record colors and the source colors. See if I can reveal that a bit. In the record source monitor, the composer window. Yeah, so when I'm teaching, this is great, especially for new students. I can use the source side green, record side blue. When I'm working, I want this gray. I work with a lot of color, so I want as overall as simple colored interface as possible. So I typically turn this off. If your seasoned Media Composer user is like, where did this come from? You might want to turn this off as well, okay? If you're used to the blue and green and love it, great, use it. And then the same thing on the timeline side. Now I don't have any tracks selected in my timeline, but right now if I selected them, they're going to come up in blue on the record side and green on the source side. I like to use my own color, so I turn that off there too, okay? Which isn't going to show anything because I don't have anything selected. But if I click OK to that, now when I click a timeline track, it's in that purple I chose in the interface settings instead of the blue. Okay, so some options. So that's interface. Now, rather than going through Composer and Timeline like I love to with that interface, I'll be able to show a little bit later. Let's go to keyboard, because I know some of you guys are like, let's get that keyboard mapped properly. Keyboard proper mapping is what works for you. Now, there is this rumor that tends to float around saying, hey, never map your keyboard, don't change any settings because your settings will stop working. Settings are really dynamic and change a lot, and there is always that possibility that your settings might stop working, which is why as soon as I have them set up, I save them out in case that happens. But I've been mapping keyboards and setting up settings like regularly forever, and it has not been a big deal. So map away. So I'm going to open up my keyboard setting, or hit K for keyboard. This is completely the default, okay? And then I'm going to go to Tools and Command Palette, which I always have to find because I use Command 3, Control 3 on Windows. Okay, so here's every mappable button on Media Composer across 14 tabs. And after I do this little demo, I'm going to show you guys some of the tabs that you might commonly make changes to, which is heavily influenced on what I make changes to and what I show in classes. So there'll definitely be others that you'll probably change. But some considerations that are super common scenarios is number one is go to previous event, go to next event. If you're coming from a software where you're used to in your timeline, used to navigating edit to edit to edit by the up and down arrow keys, you'll probably want to map these two to your up and down arrow keys on the keyboard. Keeping in mind that the default for this is to be able to move clips up and down to other tracks. So for effects work and that kind of thing in segment mode. So you'll probably want to move that somewhere else, but you can do that. Now, if you're more traditional, when I started on Media Composer, no matter what system I was on, we had the nice colorized keyboard that showed me the layout, and I could be super lazy and know everything. I rarely have that. There's still options for it. Now there's really lovely that students have brought to me in class overlays that are like a seamless skin that doesn't really affect typing. So you can use it when you're using Media Composer and that kind of thing. So if you're using more closer to the default layout, which I do only because of teaching class and not having the brain bandwidth to memorize my own personal settings, other software settings, plus the default Media Composer settings. So that's my strategy. So map according to your strategy. So what I'm going to do is just grab this previous event button, drag it right over the A key, because I don't like every time I hit A and S, it pops into trim mode. Not my favorite. So this takes care of that. Okay. So yeah, so there you go. When you're mapping any of the buttons across any of these tabs, it's just drag and drop. So for example, I was talking about labels earlier, which also means I'm a heavy markers user. So I will map markers typically to F keys. And I'm just dragging and dropping. And you get really fast at this and can get your settings set up in like 5 minutes for sure. Okay. Now, F keys. If you're on the Mac, you might be thinking, gee, I can't map to F keys. You absolutely can. You may just have to fix your Apple settings, your Mac settings. So I'm just going to show one thing really fast. I'm going to go to the Apple menu and system preferences. And I'm going to open up the keyboard. Okay. So my touch bar, I have a touch bar. It's one of those things I was like, I don't need that. What? Nah. Now I'm like, how did I ever live without this thing? I love the touch bar. When I'm definitely working on Media Composer, that kind of thing, I want to show the F keys so that I can map to my F keys and know exactly which one is hitting a function. So you can map to your F keys. I just recommend changing the touch bar maybe. And then when I want to see normal control options, I'll go ahead, the defaults. I just have FN, the function keys, set to show control strokes. Okay. So normally, this is set up for that. Okay. So I just switch it up. All right. So I have best of both worlds. So yeah, when I hit, if I'm on my record side, and let me call back up my keyboard. When I'm on my record side, if I hit F5 right now, it didn't work. And the reason it didn't is because I have my command palette open. If I go to active palette, suddenly your whole interface will be active, which is a tip for testing things. So like now, if I come over here and I hit F5, I get my marker and I just hit it on the control strip. So you can totally do that, mapping that. Another thing we could do is we can map to the shift key because you're going to run out of keys fast. So if I go to my shift key, here's the default layout, and I'm going to go back to button reassignment. A couple things. For me, my shift A and S key takes me to markers typically, but I do go to segment tools. All right, so you can actually move things around as well. You don't have to find segment tools under smart tools to map it. So what I'll do is I put it under related keys, which to me is similar to splice and overwrite because they're yellow and red. So I'm actually going to move the yellow arrow to the V key and the red arrow to the B key. Okay, so you can rearrange as well. And then if I go to move, there's my markers, which I use all the time, which is Shift A, Shift S, and there we go. So remap. Other things under the other tab, by the way, if you want to blank something out, maybe you're coming from another software and you keep hitting a hotkey and it does not do what you want, but you're not sure what you want to put there, blank out that button so nothing happens, so things don't act wonky for you. And then final demo is the menu to button reassignment. You can map menu items from any of the drop-down menus. Mostly I map from the tools menu, and my strategy typically is to map things that don't have a default shortcut. So for example, source browser. Every time I want to import or link, I don't want to have to right click or go to the file menu and drill down for source browser. I just want to call it up. So since source browser is similar to classic imports or classic command of Command I in other softwares, I actually map it under my Shift I key. So all I have to do is hold down Shift, click the I key, and notice it turns purple. And now I've let go of my hands and it's stuck. And then I'll just go to Tools and Source Browser. Okay, so now I can use Shift I. Okay, so I do related things. Okay. Another one I tend to do is either Tools and Media Tool or the titler, although the titler is also button-to-button reassignment through effects. Okay, so things like that. Now, if you're like, oh man, I am definitely not ready to map to the keyboard, no worries. You can map to your timeline buttons and that kind of thing. So I'm just going to go with like Tools and Media Tool. And now it's a timeline button. I know I have a lot going on here, so it's hard to see. So yeah, so it's the same exact process. It's, are you dragging to your keyboard or assigning to your keyboard, or are you assigning to your interface? All right. Okay. So that's all I have with the keyboard setting on that sense. I want to make sure that I have time to show a couple more things and show my setting. One thing I do want to touch on is workspaces and real fast workspaces and timeline layouts. All right, especially for those of you who aren't necessarily a fan of these vibrant colors. They are awesome, but I tend to work on super classic colors for Media Composer, which may seem boring to you, but they work. And again, make it your own. Okay, so for the look of my timeline, I'm just going to turn off segment mode so I can scrub anywhere I want. My timecode track tends to be at the bottom, and I tend to use classic old colors. So I'm going to go to my fast menu to set this up. And a quick trick is to go to track color and default. Okay, which some of mine are changing. Let me select all my tracks here. And now I'm just going to go to default setup and do that one more time. Default, and then default setup takes me to the classic brown and gray, which is a little easier on the eyes. This is my starting point always. And then I move my timecode track. Even though it's a power tip we share in Avid classes, Media Composer classes, to move the timecode track between video and audio, I actually tend to favor it on the bottom. All right. So now I have kind of a default set. To save this view, I'm just going to do save as. And this might be just my default editing view. It's not completely, but let's do that. Edit. Okay, and the reason I'm doing that is because then I can set it to call up when I call my edit workspace. I'm going to do a quick audio space. One note, if you want all your tracks to be uniform, add as many tracks as you think you're going to use. Okay, so let's say 6. So I'm going to go Command U, or you can right click in your timeline and that kind of thing, so that whatever I set up right now will be set up for all audio tracks. One thing that'll always carry over for a particular sequence to audio settings is if your waveforms are too tall. If I do Command Option K on my keyboard, Control Option K on Windows, it'll shrink the waveform heights, and then I can make my tracks nice and big. Okay. All of my settings tend to have duration and that. So things you grab from this fast menu and from track heights and that kind of thing will carry over to the save. If you're using per track control panel, okay, so if you're using these, those do not carry over, okay? So if I want my waveforms to show up, I actually, in the setting, I want to go to the fast menu, audio data, waveform, and then call up anything else I use. Me, I mostly use volume, so I'm going to call that up. And then we'll save this, and I'm going to call it audio. Okay, there we go. So super fast. Last thing I'm going to be able to show today, and then I'll call up my settings real, export these, and then call up my settings. Under Edit, if I go to Windows Workspaces, I can actually set up properties for any of my workspaces, whether it's the preset ones that you see listed at the top here or new ones I create. And if I do link to name settings, I could say anything that I named a setting edit will apply. Okay, so notice now my timeline just changed. Okay, notice there's no waveforms showing because that's a per track control, and I turned those off earlier. Okay, so then if I one more Windows Workspaces and audio, I didn't mean to do that. I meant to go to Windows Workspaces properties, pressure of time. I got the ticking time. Okay, so then I'm going to call this audio. Oh, you got to spell it right or it won't work. I am the queen of typos. Okay, so now when I go to edit, it's my edit workspace, super simple one, audio and that kind of thing. Not exactly the same. One note right now, if I close out my audio tool, notice that my timeline didn't resize. That goes back to that interface setting where it won't, okay, because I said blank panel. Okay, all right, let's say these are perfect, and they are. So I'm going to go back to settings, shift command equals, shift control equals, and I'm going to export my setting. So that was really fast. Let's do this pop-up menu on user profile. When you export your setting, if you're in a shared environment like Nexus, you'll want to do personal or group. One will override your settings. The other one says, nope, they're locked. And then if you're on your own system that's not on shared storage or shared workspace, you want to do local and standard. So that's where I'm at. And then I'm going to set a location, which is usually for me a removable drive, but because I'm in my dining room studio right now, I didn't bring my drive with me, so I'm going to put it on my desktop. But normally it's on a drive. That way, if anything happens with my settings, I can recall these. Okay, so I just went to this pop-up menu and hit export because I know that was super fast. To bring on a setting, so I can show you a couple things with my settings as we wind down here. You go to import, and normally they're on a drive, they're on my desktop because I brought enough stuff with me to my little studio. And I have a setting. Mine are usually named like edit, color correction, effects, because I have lots of settings, test. Anytime I'm testing or playing, troubleshooting, anything I create is always test. This one I just, for lack of a name, I put Marianne MBP, which is MacBook Pro, super creative. And so I'm going to call up my settings, and this is a super typical setting for me. Notice I have one row of buttons in my Media Composer window, and that's because if I right click and go to Composer Settings, I left it as one row. I usually have that. I always look at two columns of data, two rows of data, which you can see up here. So Composer Settings, that's super typical for me. My timeline doesn't have that toolbar at the top, and that's because I mapped to the keyboard. Also, if you're super savvy and look at the bottom of the timeline, you'll notice that these aren't the defaults. You can, from your command palette, I just hit Command 3, you can map to that bottom panel now. So I just grabbed the link selection one that links everything together, like audio, like video, down there with a button-to-button reassignment. Okay. My keyboard settings are perfect for me. They may not be perfect for you. If I open these up, you'll see that like my F keys have extract top, extract tail, match frame, and that kind of thing. I have some edit buttons grouped together. My shift key tends to be things that are related, like the motion effect editors under M, the audio keyframe is under K, things like that, the source browser, which I showed, and that. So this is a pretty typical setting for me as far as that goes. Okay, I know I'm over. There's one last thing that I want to show, but it's just flew out of my head. So what I think I'll go ahead and do is take questions, because you guys tend to ask what I forget to present. So what are some questions?
Thanks, Marianne. I am watching the social feed, so if you have questions, go ahead and enter them at this time, and we'll get them over to Marianne. And it sounded like you covered everything in one breath, so I'm glad you weren't like changing colors there, because I know you're trying to get through everything so fast.
Right.
So let's see. I'm looking for the questions, see if we get any coming in here. There normally is just that little bit of a delay. We do have somebody asking, can you show us how you dived into your own personal settings again? I guess they want to see your settings.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I know. Everybody always wants the instructor settings, which mine are based on defaults due to memorization issues. But yeah, if you've already called them up, you can switch to them just through the user settings panel. If you need to import them, you can grab them through the user tab in the settings as well, or in the select project dialog box and choose import. And then on your operating system level, you just go to wherever you have them stored, which usually is on external storage for me. Today they're here. So that's where I import this. So if I hit open right now, it's going to tell me, you already have this one. Okay. So yeah, so that's how I grab that. And then this is also where you grab to create a new user. Hopefully that answers
I have a question that came in. The user is using Media Composer at home and their school has a different version. So they tend to have an issue when they're trying to import their export settings. Any advice?
Yeah, have 2 user sets. If you're doing a tiny point release, like I just upgraded to 2020.9 from 2020.8, I just do the update user profile. If you're like on 2020 at home and at school they're on 2019, you're going to want to create 2 user profiles, create one for school, create one for home, and just have them handy on a drive. But that's the best you can do. I have separate settings for if I'm on a dual monitor display. I have separate settings for going across various big releases of Media Composer, like 2019 to 2020, and also going across Windows and Mac. I have separate settings. So it's just, with monitors and that kind of thing. And even on this single monitor setting, this is my normal monitor resolution. So I have a separate setting for my normal monitor resolution. It's just easier than trying to wrestle with it. And I'm so fast with creating settings. A lot of times I just come in and just like create a new user. It's kind of that Zen get ready moment. And I just start making some settings. Other questions?
Awesome. Thank you for that. We'll give everyone just a second to see if any other questions come in. I do like the fact that you can do multiple export settings for, like you said, if you're going from different versions or different systems. So that's great. I'll go ahead and post up. Let me go ahead and share my screen and we'll get posted the sessions for next week. So we'll get those up here as well. So hopefully everybody can see those. And again, if you do have questions for Mary Ann and we're not able to see those at this time, please drop me a line at liveonlinelearning@avid.com and we'll get those over to Mary Ann to ask. Also, hey, if there's a topic you want to see that we haven't covered, believe it or not, we've done almost 100 sessions since June. And so we've covered everything from, of course, Media Composer to Pro Tools, even graphics. But if there is something you would like to see us do, please drop us a note for that as well. So Mary Ann, I'm not seeing any questions at this time, so you can catch your breath and relax and know that you gave us another amazing session, and we will get this posted to avid.com as soon as possible. And I believe you have the session on October 22nd as well, right? The nesting effects.
I do. One of my favorite topics.
So if you want to see
people come back.
Yes, so we'll see Mary Ann back on the 22nd, and on the 15th is Medi, and that's with Andy, who we also love. So thank you all for attending, and we will look forward to seeing you on the next session. Have a good one, Mary Ann.
Thanks. Bye, guys.